Hello, Robs. We're back with The Wandering Heir, a Christmas story by Charles Reade. Just bought 9 more volumes of Charles Reade for like $12 online, plus shipping. So expect more Charles Reade. I like him. I know he's supposed to be a chintzy writer, but what's this? These pages are literally ripping out. 145, so I'll read. Maybe I can read the whole thing. Chapter 7. It was a beautiful moonlight night. The great ocean was calm, and the light air so gentle that the snow-white studding sails were set aloft to catch them. The Honorable James Annesley, in a suit of blue velvet laced with silver, gold-laced hat, and jewel-hilted sword, paced the deck and admired the solemn scene. The incredible sheen of the rippling ocean kissed by moonbeams, the ship's gigantic shadow that ran trembling alongside, and the waves like molten diamonds that sparkled to the horizon. His tide had turned, finery on his back, 100 gold pieces in his pocket, that Matthews, a man of large fortune, had insisted on lending him, a popular admiral conveying him home, an honored guest. Yet it seemed there was something wanting, for after he had enjoyed the scene a while, he sat down upon a gun and meditated, and his meditation was not gay, for soon he heaved a sigh. Now this sigh caught the quick ear of a young lady who had not long emerged upon deck. It was Joanna Philippa Chester, who never showed herself by day, but took the air at night, and even then had always her little mask in hand ready to whip on. Joanna was farther still from complete happiness than James was. Her breast was torn with doubts and fears and shames, for which my reader, who has only seen her fitful audacity in boy's clothes, may not be quite prepared. She was now all tremors and misgivings, and paid the penalty of her disguise. Under that disguise she had fallen deep in love with James Annesley, yet inspired him with no tenderer feeling than friendship for a boy. That knowledge of the heart, which an inexperienced but thoughtful woman sometimes attains by constantly thinking on its mysteries, told her that between love and friendship there is a gulf, and that gulf sometimes impassable. Philip might stand forever between James and Philippa. And besides this, for a girl to wear boys' clothes was indelicate. It was condemned by law. It was scouted by public opinion. James Annesley, even in this humble condition, had shown a great sense of propriety, and she felt with a cold chill running down her back that he was not the man to overlook indelicacy in her sex, much less make an Amazon his wife. And now, as she had learned with her sharp ears, the story he had told, he was confirmed. Her was confirmed, and he was the real Earl of Anglesey, and all the less likely to honor a tomboy with his hand. For 3 whole days she had longed and pined to speak to him, yet fear and modesty had held her back. She could not bear to be Philip any more, yet she dreaded to be Philippa, lest she should lose even Philip's place in his regard. Even now, the moment she saw him seated with the moon glittering on his silver lace and his jeweled sword, and his dear, shapely head lowered in pensive thought, her first impulse was to recoil, slip down into her cabin again, and torture herself with misgivings, as she had been doing all the voyage. But love would not let her go without a single look. She turned her eyes on him, that soon began to swim with tenderness as she looked at him. She stole a long drink of ineffable love, and the next moment she would have been gone. But he sighed deeply, and she heard it. Then the habit of consoling him and her yearning heart were too much for her. By a sudden impulse, she whipped on her mask and stole towards him. She trembled, she blushed, but all the woman was now in arms to defend that love which was her life. He heard her coming, looked up, and saw a tall young lady close upon him, dressed in the fashion with a little silk hood and a mask that hid all but her mouth. He rose, removed his hat, and bowed ceremoniously. She curtsied in the same style. "Forgive me, sir," said she. "I fear I interrupt your meditations." "Most agreeably, madam. Methought I heard you sigh, sir." "I dare say you did, madam. I was surprised, sir, for I hear you are a gentleman of quality, going home to high fortune after encountering her frowns." Sure, that would make her smile the sweeter. Madam, it may be so, but my enemies are powerful. I may find it very hard to dispossess the wrongful owners. And 'twas for that you sighed? Not at all, madam. I sighed for the loss of a dear friend. Alas. What, dead? Now, God forbid. False, then, no doubt. I hope not, but I am sore perplexed, for he never failed me before. He? What, 'twas only a man, then, after all? 'Twas a boy, for that matter. But what a boy! You never saw his fellow. Madam, his head was all wit, his heart all tenderness, his face all sunshine. He brightened my adversity. And now, when fortune seems to shine, he has deserted me. Oh, Philip, Philip. Philip, was that his name? Yes, madam. Is he a very dark boy? Yes, madam, yes. About my height? Oh, no, madam, not by half a head. Philippa smiled at that and said, Then, sir, you shall sigh no more on his account, for I happen to know that same Philip is here, in this very ship. Is it possible? God bless you for that good news, madam. Oh, madam, pray bring him to me, for my heart yearns for him. Why has he hidden himself from me? Nay, sir, you must have patience. The boy is not so much to blame. He is in trouble and dares not show his face on deck. I wonder whether I may tell you the truth. Yes, madam, for heaven's sake. Well, then, the truth is, ahem, he is here disguised as a woman. You amaze me, madam. And if you were to accost him as Philip, 'twould be overheard. It might be his ruin. If you can be so much his friend as to fall into this disguise and treat him with distant civility while he is on board the ship, I'll answer for him. He will come to you, not tonight, but tomorrow night at this time. James Annesley eagerly subscribed to these terms. Next evening he paced the deck impatiently, and in due course a young gentlewoman came towards him, with Philip's very face, but blushing and beaming. James ran to meet her, devoured her face, and then cried, It is, oh my sweet Philip. The young lady drew back instantly in alarm and said, Is this what you promised? Call me Philip again, or offer the slightest freedom, and you shall never see me again. My name is Philippa. So be it, thou capricious toad. I am too overjoyed at sight of thee to thwart thy humours. Thou wert never like any other, he that breathes. I shall be more unlike them than ever now, said she. Methinks my disposition is changed since I put off my boy's attire. And the worst of it is all my courage hath oozed away. It had always a trick of coming and going, Philippa, or I leave the ship. Well, Philippa, then, what sort of a gentlewoman do I make? Nay, if I knew not the trick, I should take you for the most beautiful woman I ever saw. Philippa blushed with pleasure. And you look beautiful too, said she. Fine feathers make fine birds. He then scolded her gently and asked her why she had deserted him. Well, I'll tell you the truth, she said, and delivered him a whole string of fibs. She met him next evening and the next, and so mystified him by her beauty and her bashfulness that he questioned Matthews and the admiral about the young lady, but Matthews knew nothing, and the admiral pretended to know nothing, she having sworn him to secrecy. Philippa was offended at his curiosity and sent him word he had done very ill to ask other persons about her. She should not come on deck for ever so long. She kept her word, though it cost her dear. Even when they touched at Jamaica and everybody else landed, she kept her cabin. But when they left Jamaica, she took another line. She came openly on deck now and then in the daytime and removed her mask. The effect may be divined. The officers of the ship treated her like a queen and courted her with all possible attentions. These she received with singular modesty, politeness, and prudence, and her heart being sincerely devoted to one, her head was not to be turned. James Annesley looked on with wonder and a dash of satire to see men all but kneeling to a boy, but he soon got jealous, and the other men opened his eyes, and he began to ponder over many things. The truth flashed on him, and Philippa saw it in his face. Then she coquetted with her happiness, and when he begged a private interview, she put him off. But when they passed Lizard Point, she came to her senses and gave him his opportunity. He was much agitated. She was more so, but hid it better. Tell me the truth, he cried. You were always Philippa, and I a blind fool? She hid her red face in her hands. Philippa, he cried, you have killed the friend of my bosom. Will you give me nothing in exchange for him? Alas, James, she cried, what can I give you that you will love as well as you did him? I hate that boy. Nay, do not hate him, but for him I had never known the greatest, truest, tenderest heart that ever beat in woman. Oh, Philippa, you saved me from despair. You saved me from servitude. I never could love another now. You are a woman. Be my bosom friend still, but by a dearer title. Be my sweetheart, my darling, my wife. Ay, that or the grave, she cried, and the next moment he held her, curling round his neck and cooling her hot cheeks with tears of joy. They landed at Portsmouth, took a kind leave of the admiral. Why do I want to keep saying admirable? Admiral, to whom they owed so much, and accompanied by Captain Matthews, dashed up to Staines with post horses, 4 at every relay. When they came near to the town, she bade the driver post to the prison. She demanded to see Jonas Hanway. He was called into the yard, and at sight of her gave a scream of joy, and they had a cry together, and forgave each other. She feed the jailer to send to the proper authorities and take the necessary steps for his liberation. Then she went on to Thomas Chester, who lived outside the town by the riverside. But Matthews left them in the town and went to London on his way to Ireland. He had inherited large estates and was about to leave the king's service. Thomas Chester, though a man not easily moved, gave a loud shout when his niece ran to him. He folded her in his arms and thanked God aloud in a broken voice again and again. When they were a little calmer, he said to his man, "Send abroad and let them ring all the church bells for 3 miles about. I'll find the ale. And thou, Thomas, bring in your young lady's things. She is mistress of the house." Then they went out and found 2 boxes and one James Annesley seated peaceable. "And who is this?" said the old man, stirring not a little. "'Tis only my James," says she, as if every young gentlewoman had a James. But the next moment her cheeks were dyed with blushes. "Dear uncle, he has been my friend and companion in servitude, and some do say he is thee. Whoever he is, he hath brought me thee, my sweet long-lost niece, and must lie at my house this happy night." So he received James cordially and put off all inquirers till the morrow. The next morning James told him of his own accord. He loved Philippa, and was so happy as to have won her affections. He also spoke of his wrongs, and said he was Lord Altham's son, and dispossessed by his uncle, who had kidnapped him, and he should go into Ireland at once, and hoped to punish his uncle, and make Philippa Lady Anglesey. He proved himself in earnest by starting for Ireland this very day. The parting with Philippa was very tender, and left her almost inconsolable, being their first real separation since they knew each other. So the wise old lawyer let her have her cry out. Next day he told her what the young man had said. "Alas," said she, "he is gone on a wild goose errand, I fear, and as for me, I would not give 1 straw to be Lady Anglesey. To be Mrs. James is heaven enough for me, and oh, if any ill befall him in that savage Ireland, I shall always think 'twas because I was not by him as heretofore, and you will have but one more trouble with me to bury me." "Niece," said the old man, craving your pardon, "you are pretty far gone." "Never was woman farther," said she frankly. "I am fair sick with love. My James carries my heart and my life in his bosom, go where he will," and she leaned her head prettily on his shoulder. "Hum," said the lawyer, and dropped the subject, not possessing even its vocabulary. He waited a reasonable time, and then cross-examined her. "My young mistress," said he, "have you told your sweetheart you have 13,000 pounds, and now I think on it, 'tis nearer 14,000, by reason of your folly in going and getting your own living, instead of spending on it. Have I told James? No, not yet. I found out my father's will by that advertisement, and since he wished it kept secret, I have held that wish sacred." Mr. Chester told her she had done well. Lord Anglesey had been long in possession, and it was not likely he would be ousted without a fearful litigation in which her little fortune might easily be swamped. "No, Philippa," said he, "still go by your father's will and by my lights, and let us not risk 1 shilling of your fortune. Your husband can never be a pauper while that remains in your hands." She caught that idea in a moment, and gave her solemn promise. The first letter from Ireland served to confirm her uncle's wisdom. James wrote to say that he had been to a dozen attorneys and they all refused to take up his cause against a nobleman so powerful as Lord Anglesey, and who had been years in possession without a voice raised against his title. However, a day or two after writing this, James Anglesey, James Annesley, why is his name different from I don't understand this, fell in with a long-headed attorney called McKercher, who listened to his story more thoughtfully than the others, and went so far as to ask him for a list of the people he thought could bear out his statements. Having got this, Mr. McKercher found Farrell and Purcell, and by means of them, one or two more not known to James Annesley, and they established the kidnapping. Then McKercher began to think more seriously of the case. He called on Mr. Annesley at his lodgings and found him and Matthews taking a friendly glass and talking the matter over. McKercher made 3 and said over the said glass that the kidnapping was certainly a fine point, but it would be worthless without direct evidence to Mr. Annesley's parentage, and money would be required to ransack the county of Meath for evidence and for other purposes, for money would certainly be used against them freely. The warm-hearted Matthews offered £1,000 directly to begin. Thereupon McKercher's eyes glittered, and he hesitated no longer. All 3 went out to Mr. Matthews' house that day in Ringsend cars, and next day rode on his own horse to ransack Meath and Wexford for evidence. They found some little evidence, and McKercher secured it, but there were 2 enemies in the field before them. Death was one, Lord Anglesey the other. This nobleman had got a fortnight's start, and in rather a curious way, Admiral Vernon anchored off Jamaica a few days. It got wind that he was bringing home the real Lord Anglesey. The Daily Post announced it, and the Gentleman's Magazine copied, as indeed may be seen in the Gentleman's Magazine for February 1841. Death, the other antagonist, had been unusually busy since James Annesley crossed over the bar of Dublin. Lady Altham, dead. Mrs. Avarice, to whom she had spoken of a son, dead. The chaplain who he believed had christened him, dead. His sponsors, male and female, dead. But McKercher was not to be baffled. He hunted up the old servants of Dunmayne House, and from one to another he began to create that pile of testimony which even now stands on record to prove this obscure man, the Napoleon of all attorneys, living or dead. He and James and Matthews rode hundreds of miles after evidence, till one night Annesley was fired at from the edge of a wood, and 2 slugs whistled close by his head. They all spurred away in great alarm. When they got to town, they were going to tactful McKercher set to work that moment, and printed bills describing the attempt, offering £1,000 reward, and by subtle insinuation accused Lord Anglesey of the crime. He got up what we now call a demonstration, showed his handsome client to the public on a veranda, stuck over with bills thus worded: "This is the heir. Come, let us kill him, that the inheritance may be ours." For all that, he sent Annesley back to England directly. "It is too pretty a suit to be abated by a bullet," said keen McKercher. James Annesley returned to Staines and found the roses leaving Philippa's cheek. Ere he had been back a week, they bloomed again. McKercher circulated his bills in Dublin with a guarded account of the attempted assassination, just keeping clear of an indictment for libel. One of the bills was sent over to Lord Anglesey by a friend. The nobleman at this period began to lose heart. His estates were large but encumbered. He had been for years amusing himself with trigamy, and trigamy had entailed its expenses. All the ladies had to be dressed as if there was but one Lady Anglesey. And you may see by Miss Gregory's bill that those noble brocades, though cheaper in the end than the trash we call silk, were dear at first. Then the 3 ladies had children, and one of the 3 was so ill-bred as to indict my lord, and had to be bought off. Then he had Charles Annesley and Frank Annesley on his back. Francis Annesley, an English barrister, claimed a large portion of the estates, and filed his bill in England. Charles Annesley had a large claim under Earl James's will, which claim Richard Lord Anglesey had lately compromised for a third, and then, with his usual perfidy, evaded the compromise, whereon Charles obtained a decree with costs and a sequestration under the terms of which Charles now received all the Irish rents, and paid himself his share. The Earl, therefore, was in the power of Charles Annesley for his very subsistence. On the top of all this came James Annesley, armed with McKercher and hard cash, of which his lordship, like many other Irish proprietors, had mighty little compared with the values of his estates. Thus attacked on all sides and influenced probably by some reasons not easy to penetrate so long after the event, he began to falter. And being in his house in Bolton Row, which house the writer of these lines, it may be said in passing, occupied for some years, a century later, he sent for his London solicitor, Gifford, and directed him to try and effect a compromise with Jemmy, as he called him. Gifford was too cautious to commit his client to writing in a matter so dangerous, but he intimated to McKercher that he had something important to say if McKercher would come to London. McKercher wrote back very courteously to say he was very busy collecting evidences, but would wait on Mr. Gifford in a fortnight. In anticipation of this conference, Lord Anglesey told Gifford on what terms he would resign his estates and live in France. He even went so far as to engage a French tutor. Meantime, James Annesley was a guest of Mr. Thomas Chester and a favored suitor for his niece's hand. The old lawyer liked James, and at this time hardly doubted he was the real heir to the late Lord Altham, and he intimated plainly that if Mr. Annesley would allow Philippa's dower, whatever it might be, to be settled on herself, they might marry as soon as they chose for him. Young Annesley smiled at the stipulation. I hope to settle half the counties of Wexford and Meath on her besides, said he. So one Sunday morning that the lovers were seated in a pew with their heads over one prayer book, her dear old tutor delivered certain ephemeral words that seemed to this happy pair to have a strange vitality, compared with the immortal part of the liturgy. Said he, in a sonorous yet kindly voice, I publish the banns of marriage between the Honourable James Annesley, bachelor, of the parish of Dunmayne in Ireland, and Mistress Joanna Philippa Chester, spinster of this parish. This is the first time of asking. If any of you know cause or just impediment why these two persons should not be joined together in holy wedlock, ye are now to declare it. While these words were delivered, Philippa's face was a picture, her eyes lowered, her cheeks mantling with a gentle blush. The words rang strangely in those lovers' ears. How tight custom holds civilized men and women, and flies them but with a string. Both had led adventurous lives, had been slaves in a distant colony, and this demure lass with long black lashes lowered had played a fine Casper in boy's clothes, or caper. Yet there they must sit at last over one prayer book in Staines Church, and hear their banns cried in one breath, with two more couple that had never budged out of Middlesex. Let the reader now contemplate this pretty picture in James Annesley's prospects, a rose-colored panorama. In Ireland, his interests pushed by the rarest of all friends, an able and zealous attorney. In London, his arch-enemy losing heart and preparing to accept an income and retire from the disputed estates to Paris. In Staines, his hand in his sweet Philippa's in a holy wedlock, the sacred union of two pure and well-tried hearts, awaiting him in one little fortnight. Even that fortnight to be spent in sight of paradise, and the gate ajar. Even writers are human, and I feel myself linger here, for it grieves even hardened me to have to plunge again into the misfortunes of the good. But now are my wings of fancy clipped. Hard facts holds me with remorseless grasp, and I am constrained to show how all this bright picture was shivered in a day, and by the man's own hand. Focus. Well, I guess all the happiness is going to end here. We still got 50 some pages left, 60 pages. What awaits James and Philippa? Goodbye, Robs. Goodbye.